So it's our pleasure to welcome you all to our workshop on security cooperation in the Pacific Islands. Before we begin, Ngambri and Ngunnawal custodian and a senior community engagement officer in the First Nations portfolio here at the ANU, Paul Girawa House, has very kindly agreed to come and do a welcome to country for us. Thank you, Paul.
Amandangu, Wurugawuri Joanne, thank you, Joanne. So, Wurugawuri, thank you, Joanne. Jumburuburu Maramang Naramarang, good morning, Maringa Mayin, good morning everyone. Yundu, Paul Girawa House. My name is Paul Girawa House, Nadu, Maradu, Marebiringo, Murundore, Nyambi Nurubang, Nyambi Nurumbango. I was born here at the Old Canberra Hospital, here on Nyambi country. Anyone born in the Old Canberra Hospital? Good to meet some Old Canberra Hospital alumni. Injamara Baladu Yari Nyambri Wagalu Wiradri Niang. I speak Nyambri Wagalu Wiradri language. Injamara Bala Nama Dr. Matilda Williams House. My respects to my mother, Dr. Matilda Williams House. My mother was the first Indigenous Australian to be awarded an honorary doctorate here from the ANU, just recently as 2017. So Yilangalang, and I'll talk a little bit more about Mum in a minute. Yinjamara, Yilangalang Bu, Gibabango, Wugabu, Migabu, Diranilbangmin. Ladies and gentlemen, young men, young women, distinguished guests, Nyari, Jamali, Nyambri, Guma, Woglu, Wallablo, Nunu, and Agaraga, Waradri, and Mujigang, Yandu, Jayandu. My respects to Nyambri, Guma, Woglu, Wallablo, Nunu, and Agaraga, Waradri, elders past and present. Nyari, Jamarabu, Mujigango, Nurumbanjigu, Ninya Yenidu. My respects to all people from all parts of the country. Nyambri, Woglu, Wallablo, and Nunu, Mayinga, Banya, Ninoga, Nurumbangodara. Nyambri and Nunua people welcome you all the country. Nadu Wurugibigi Balabambo Gubo Balagi Bango Bugoingulila Dumbali Namurwa Marambo. We listen to our old people, our ancestors, our elders. They show us the straight, the correct path. Dulagan Muru, good path. Goingulila Bilungali now, Yamamali now, Wallamali now. They nurture us, they protect us, they guide us, our old people. Mamba wara na minyago, wuragabinya, wuradarago, winningala, gubaligo. Looking to see and listening to hear and learning to understand. Injamara, Injamal Giju, Injamarabu, Injamali. Respect, respected, respectful, respect. It's a powerful word on country. It's a philosophy, it's an ideology. It means to go slow, be patient, be polite, be gentle. Take responsibility, all those good nutrients. Injamara Bala, Magum now, Gujigang Gagu Marawala, Nunga Yalara Dalani. Mayin, respect is in the people and the government embracing voice treaty, truth telling. Injamara Bala Ween, Girambanana, Nurubala Bua, Gurubia Bira Banganara Nara. Respect is in the warmth of the campfire and the possum skin cloak that shelters all. Yinjamara Bala Balabida Bina Bina Wuruban Yambi Nurumbango. Respect is in the Canberra Creek and the breeze quietly moving through country. Yinjabara Bala Mugga Giribirinda Bogungu Girinda. Respect is in the journey of the bogong moths in the mountains. They also taste very good, but they're also endangered. Our welcome to country is always made in the spirit of peace and a desire for harmony for all people of modern Australia. And our main aim as local custodians is to establish an atmosphere of mutual respect through the acknowledgement of our ancestors and the recognition of our rights to declare our special place in the pre and post history of the region. And we warmly welcome everyone now living, working, visiting, studying here on our ancestral country. The name Canberra is derived from the name of our people and country, the Nyambri, and was gazetted here on the 22nd of January 1834 as Canberra Station under the New South Wales colonial government. Living a respectful way of life cares for country. Respect is taking responsibility for the now, the past, the present and the future. We cared for Mother Earth since the dawn of time, and evidence of our statehood, our sovereignty, our ownership can be seen everywhere throughout the country. Our signature is in the land, not just our DNA. And taking care of country is important to us all. The more we look after country, the more it looks after us. Yinjamara, Burudurai Murun, Waginya, Nurumbango. Respect everything living and growing. And respect to all of us as contemporary modern Australians here and from whatever country you come from. Our ancestors never ceded this country, never gave this country up. It was stolen without consent or treaty. And we've never been compensated for our losses. And these are matters yet to be resolved in this country. But through voice, treaty and truth telling, hopefully we can achieve some justice for our people in this country, for all of our people. The law of the land talks about giving respect and honour to all people in all parts of the country. Yinjamara, being patient, being polite, being gentle, then people will respect you. Yinjamara Bala Maragana Mai Nurumbango, respect is in the people working in defence, protecting country and people. With that, Yinjamara Maramara Girama Maranya, respect shapes us and lifts up the people. Marambangbalam, Noya Goyamalam, it's wonderful, it's fabulous to be here to share a little bit of our story, protocol Welcome to Country. Welcome to Countries that occur today happened for tens of thousands of years on country. Our people just didn't wander the country aimlessly, wandering into other people's landscapes and into other people's sovereignty. Our ancestors lived and operated under the sophisticated system of First Nation democracy in this country. We must remember under the concrete and the steel and the glass of our cities and country towns is a rich, powerful, compelling First Nation history. A 65,000 plus history, which is now a shared history that belongs to all of us. And we all have a responsibility in looking after country. So with that, Kuwayambana Gurabari, welcome Mandango Wurragawuri. Before I go, I'm going to play a song of the Iraqi, the didgeridoo here. And I do have 3 sets of tapping sticks. Someone to come and join us here, play this Welcome to Country song. So Mandango, thank you. Welcome, enjoy the conference. I'm only here next door as well today, so you might see me during morning tea. I'm happy to catch up and have a chat. So Mandango, thank you. Anyone like to come and play tapping sticks? I can't play the didgeridoo without it. Yeah, come and join. Thanks. I'd like to acknowledge the ADF, Australian ADF as well. Yeah, come and.
Paul will instruct us, I'm sure.
David, how you going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Yeah. We've got one more set. I think we should have some gender balance. Oh, good. You're just going to follow me, very simple.
Well, a deep thanks and gratitude to Paul for that. I think that sets a beautiful atmosphere and spirit for us to continue on during our workshop. Now, in the Pacific way, before we begin, we would like to take a moment for reflection. We're grateful that so many people in this room have come from afar to be here with us for these next 2 days, that you've travelled away from your families and that you have arrived safely. We're grateful to all come together at this time. So let's all take a moment to set our intention for the next 2 days of stimulating conversations, relationship building and knowledge sharing. And I think Paul has done a really good job actually of getting us started on that path, so I thank him and I thank all of you. So before I begin on the substantive content, some housekeeping matters. The bathrooms, you might have already seen, they're just across the foyer. Our food for morning tea, lunch and afternoon tea will be served in the Coombs extension, which is just across the courtyard outside the Headley Bull Centre. The fire exits are basically these doors and then run out. We are requesting, if possible, that the ANU is requesting, if possible, that people wear masks and use hand sanitizer, and we do have masks available if you don't have one. So this workshop is the culmination of a 3-year project funded by a Defence Strategic Policy grant. And we want to thank the Department of Defence for their support, and we note that the views expressed during the workshop are those of the speakers and not necessarily those of the ANU, the University of Adelaide, the Australian Government or the Department of Defence. So I'm joined up here by my fellow workshop organisers. We have Henrietta McNeil, who is our Project Research Associate, James Batley from the ANU, Anna Poles from Massey University, Ellen Tidwell from Georgetown University, and Haikazu Sakai from Kansai Garai University. Now, before handing over to them to give their reflections on our project, I want to give everyone some background about what brought us here today. So this project had its genesis in 2019, when it became clear that Australia would be seeking to deepen its cooperation with allies and partners, strategic partners, particularly New Zealand, the US and Japan in the Pacific Islands. We decided that there would be value in examining how these states could work together in the region, and we requested funding for a relatively modest project focused on quite a narrow question. But once we began our work in mid-2020, we realised that our project had to go much further to examine not only how partners work together, but also how they work with Pacific Island countries and how Pacific Island countries themselves work together. And this was particularly because Pacific Island Forum leaders had agreed at their 2019 meeting that the Forum should develop a 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent to guide regional cooperation. And here I acknowledge that we have very fortunate to have Dame Meg Taylor, the former Secretary General of the Forum, who was Secretary General at that time, here in the audience. And thank you again for coming, Dame Meg. This followed the Boy Declaration on Regional Security that leaders adopted at their 2018 meeting, in which they articulated an expanded concept of security that includes human security, environmental and resource security, transnational crime and cybersecurity, underpinned by climate change as the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security and well-being of the peoples of the Pacific. Now, the Boy Declaration is accompanied by an action plan that is designed to aid Forum members in its implementation. But the wide range of security issues covered by the Declaration, particularly their relationship to issues that would be traditionally considered as falling within the realm of development, means operationalising the Declaration is challenging. These challenges and the work being done to prepare the 2050 strategy made the questions that we were addressing in the project even more pressing. And we've engaged with the Forum Secretariat during our work. Now, our first task became mapping existing security cooperation in the Pacific Islands region. And our first policy paper outlined our major findings. And Henrietta worked with the ANU cartography team to create an animated map. And I'll just click through. Here is our animated map that Henrietta worked tirelessly to create with the cartography team to illustrate the existing security cooperation mechanisms in visual form. Now, copies of our policy paper are available just outside the door to the theatre. Our mapping revealed that security cooperation in the Pacific Islands is best described as a patchwork of agreements, arrangements and institutions. While this flexibility reflects the diversity of the Pacific and of the interests and concerns of Pacific Island countries and their partners, it can challenge coordination and at times lead to poor targeting, overcrowding and overwhelmed absorptive capacity. To delve into these issues more deeply, our second output was an online workshop that we held in November last year. And speakers came from across the Pacific Islands and partner states. A key issue that came out of our discussions was the importance of definitional questions, including which states are part of the Pacific Islands region, particularly whether and how Australia and New Zealand, which are both forum members, and the US and France, which both have Pacific territories, fit into the region, and if they even do. Our discussions also illustrated that security is understood elastically. This accommodates the diversity of the region and its partner states, but it can lead to practical difficulties when it comes to operationalising security cooperation within the Pacific Islands Forum and other fora. Relatedly, while partner states are typically interested in traditional security concerns, Pacific Island countries remain primarily occupied with non-traditional security. Although partner states provide assistance to address non-traditional security issues, our workshop discussions highlighted the risk of partner states' defence and security agencies leading engagement in the Pacific and the need to ensure that diplomacy and development are not sidelined. This raises further questions about who partner states are accountable to in the provision of their security assistance. And we thank Teddy Wynn, who's in the audience today, for really bringing this issue to the fore and holding us to account as well in the workshop. And the potential for greater localisation based on lessons learnt during the COVID-19 pandemic. A policy paper summarising, Our policy paper summarising the key workshop outcomes is also available for you to collect, and we're in the final stages of editing a book based on the papers that were presented at the workshop. As everyone familiar with the Pacific will know, the Pacific Islands Forum has commissioned a review of the regional architecture to ensure that requisite governance and resourcing arrangements that promote, govern and deepen collective responsibility and accountability to deliver the 2050 strategy are in place. Mindful of these discussions, in a journal article that we published earlier this year, again available for you to collect, we decided to analyse whether security cooperation in the region constituted a security architecture as defined in the academic literature. We also considered whether it met the definition of a security complex or a security community. We found that security cooperation in the Pacific Islands does not constitute a security architecture, at least in the academic sense, as there is no, and this is the academic definition, overarching, coherent and comprehensive security structure for a geographically defined area. We also found that the region is neither a security complex nor a community, due to the extensive involvement of metropolitan powers and partner states. Instead, we concluded that our existing definition, that security cooperation in the Pacific Islands is a patchwork, does fit best, as it represents the mix of bilateral, minilateral and multilateral, formal and informal agencies, agreements and arrangements across local, national, regional and international levels. But each of these activities has left us with more questions, which is why we are meeting here today and tomorrow. And we are very fortunate to be joined by an outstanding group of speakers from across the Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, the US and France, who will be sharing their expertise with us on recent developments such as regional management of COVID-19, the response to the Tongan volcanic eruption and tsunami, and the potential impact of China's proposed economic and security pact. We'll also be asking our speakers to look forward, to consider what else partners can do to assist regional security cooperation in the maritime domain, what a fit-for-purpose regional architecture would look like, and how security cooperation can be meaningfully facilitated between local, national and regional levels. On behalf of the organising team, I thank all our speakers for their participation, particularly as many of them have travelled quite considerable distances to be here with us today. I'd also like to thank my fellow organisers, because this project wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't have joined me on this journey, so extremely grateful to you. On behalf of the team, I don't think I needed to check with them because I think they'll agree, I want to give special thanks to Henrietta. As our project research associate, Henrietta has done a lot of the heavy lifting on this project over the last 2.5 years, including this workshop. As many of the travellers here would know, that it's no mean feat to coordinate something like this, but we've also done the research and a lot of the writing that's underpinned this project, and it's been really appreciated, Henrietta. Thank you. We also want to thank the professional staff from the ANU. We have Tanuj, I can't see Stephanie, I think she's outside, and Elma, thank you very much for your assistance today and in the preparation. And from the University of Adelaide, Sarah and Emily from my home base for all their support making the workshop happen. So with that, I'm going to invite my fellow organisers to give their reflections on our project, and I think it's only fitting that Henrietta starts us off. Please.
Thank you. Kia ora tātou katoa, talopulanga maloni, whakarotola. Thank you very much, and I'm really grateful to be here today and working with such amazing scholars as the organising team on such a really fun and enjoyable project actually, and interacting with every single one of you here, so scholars, government officials, regional officials, students, NGO representatives, and all this has been through the book, our outreach, and in the process of bringing you here today, so thank you so much for being here. So for me, we're going to talk about our reflections on the project, and I just wanted to say that for me, one of the most meaningful experiences was working with a group of Pacifica scholars in Hawaii, talking about how they understand security cooperation on the ground, and the consequences of ongoing militarisation, the devastation and security impacts felt by climate change. And these local level conversations are often quite different to what we hear at the government level. So it's really been wonderful as part of this project to bring these conversations together. The project started for me in 2020, and that was a time of unprecedented crisis around the world, requiring security cooperation to keep the Pacific Islands safe from COVID-19, and we will talk about that in one of the sessions coming up soon. But during that time, we were doing the original mapping, which Professor Wallace has just discussed, and we highlighted the potential saturation of the security spaces that we've just been talking about, and the problems for small security organisations in Pacific Island states to engage with this ever-expanding plethora of security institutions. But since then, we've seen geopolitical competition increase. And because of that, we've seen the creation of new or the extension of existing regional institutions. We've seen the Joint Heads of Pacific Security expand their membership. The Australia Pacific Security College have announced they're developing a framework on transnational crime cooperation. We've seen the establishment of a health ministers meeting. The US have now become significantly involved in the Pacific Island Conference of Leaders, which has traditionally not been a space for security conversations. We've seen the Partners for the Blue Pacific established, and we've had some discussions around the government structures and membership of the Pacific Islands Forum, with Micronesian states threatening to leave, Kiribati has left, and Guam is now pushing for membership. So we've seen all these changes in the time that we've been doing the project, which has been a really interesting thing to watch develop. And in addition to these traditional actors re-engaging, after some very long absences, we've seen re-engagement from leaders such as President Biden's meeting with Pacific leaders this year. We've also seen South Korea hold their 5th South Korea Pacific Islands Foreign Ministers meeting. We've seen India indicate their interest to engage. We've seen the EU launch an Indo-Pacific strategy. So everyone is becoming interested in this region. So these changes and updates, I guess, since we started the project, show that this patchwork of security cooperation that we've been discussing is dynamic, it's active, it's ever-changing. And scholars of Pacific security cooperation, many of them amongst us, are kept on our toes. But with all these changes and emerging actors and our points from the initial mapping paper remain, and they actually need to be louder for all of the new and emerging actors to hear. So I'm just going to say these again so that everyone can hear them and reflect upon them, and I'm sure we will throughout the next couple of days. But whose interests are the new institutions and arrangements in? Are they flexible for new and emerging security challenges? How well coordinated is this partner's assistance? How are these arrangements and institutions enabling and empowering Pacific states in ownership? Are we reaching saturation, overcrowding, or a point of maximum absorptive capacity for Pacific states institutions to deal with? How are local, national, and regional levels intertwined and meaningfully facilitated? So I'm really looking forward to considering those over the next couple of days. I
think if we now work on James, if you...
Okay. Thank you very much. Morning, everybody. I guess the focus of my work over the course of this project was thinking about Australia and how it plays into regional security cooperation. And I guess one of the big events that's happened in that time, we've had a change of government in Australia, so it's worth thinking about what that means. But at the risk of stating the obvious, I think it is worth saying that it is clear that Australia is, I think by a long way, the major security partner of Pacific Island countries, certainly south of the equator. And you can measure that on all sorts of different metrics, on resources, on the breadth and depth of activities, the relationships that exist. There is clearly some ambiguity in Australia's role in regional security cooperation, because Australia is, on the one hand, it's a partner, it's a member of these organisations. It talks about shared objectives, shared values in its official discourse. At the same time, though, Australia is seeking to actively shape the regional security environment, to pick up language used in the 2020 Defence Strategic Review. So I think there's a tension there in the role that Australia plays. Just as Pacific Island countries have define their security interests differently, they're not all identical. Australia has, I think, a different set of security interests when it considers the Pacific Islands. Now, I think there is some commentary that says, well, that means that they're at odds. And I think I'd like to question that. I mean, I certainly think that the Australian government would argue that it doesn't necessarily mean that those sets of security, the way security interests are defined, are incompatible. They're not necessarily at odds, but they can work alongside each other. I think that's an open question to discuss. One of Australia's real strengths is its ability to work simultaneously both at the regional level but also at the bilateral level. I think that underpinning of the really long and well-established bilateral relationships that Australia has right around the region is really important. And when I say working regionally, of course, that doesn't only mean in the context of the established regional institutions. Australia also has, this is a very defining feature, the capacity to mount its own region-wide initiatives that, in a sense, that don't formally come under the aegis of the forum. So Henrietta's talked about initiatives like the Australia-Pacific Security College, the Pacific Fusion Centre. I mean, going back decades, of course, we've got the Pacific Patrol Boat Program, which is now the Maritime Security. So I think that capacity to mount and support its own regional initiatives is a very important feature. In some respects, the patchwork nature, I think, of regional security, in a sense, it suits Australia's interests because it's got the capacity to juggle, keep all those balls in the air at the same time. Of course, there are vulnerabilities from an Australian point of view. Pacific Island countries do define their interests differently. I think our government is finding that on the question of climate change remains an issue for them. Is it possible ever to close that gap? And when it comes to the geostrategic situation, of course, you've got a number of Pacific Island countries playing hedging strategies. In fact, I think in the case of Solomon Islands, in a sense, actively encouraging geostrategic competition to leverage advantages to itself. So that is definitely a problem for Australia. Just thinking about finally the change of government, what's striking to me really is the continuity that we're seeing in terms of the sort of big strategic assessments and perceptions. I mean, really, certainly on the question of China, Penny Wong during the election campaign very much set the tone for that. But if we're looking at some of the initiatives, the Australia Pacific Defence School, clearly very much in line with initiatives of our previous government, the pursuit of a bilateral security treaty with Papua New Guinea. Again, that's an initiative that's been picked up from the previous government but endorsed and is actively being pursued. So I think those elements of continuity are really important. Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah?
I'm just going to it's lovely to see so many people here today, and I'd just like to acknowledge the work that everyone has done as part of this team, bringing this together, and also really contributing to this community of knowledge about security in the Pacific, and that has been sort of a fundamental driving part of what we've been doing, and I think that we have certainly started and contributed to a conversation which is fundamentally important. As both Joanne and Henrietta have noted, this project has evolved at the same time that conversations about regional architecture have also been evolving in the region, as well against the backdrop of incredibly contested and complex debates around geopolitics and strategic competition. So within that, my focus, part of my focus in the project has been on the role of Aotearoa New Zealand as a security partner in the Pacific. And I'm just going to make a couple of forward-looking comments because, as many of you would know, New Zealand sort of recalibrated its policy towards the Pacific in 2018 in recognition of declining influence, but also, importantly, in recognition of growing Pacifica influence in New Zealand and this notion of a corridor between New Zealand and particularly Polynesia. And this has been a fundamental sort of reshaping of the conversation around identity in New Zealand. What this means though in a security context, and there is a bit of a gap in the conversations in New Zealand actually, which we're trying to fill. But for New Zealand, this is very much an inflection point and a point of reflection about the contest between values and interests and identity. And this is very much coming to the fore now in a way that we've probably never really experienced. And if we think that in 2016, in the Defence White Paper, the Pacific was a second priority, and yet move forward to 2018 and the Pacific is elevated to the ability of the New Zealand Defence Force to be able to operate in the Pacific is elevated to the same level as New Zealand and Cook Islands, Niue and Tokelau. You can see that there has been a sort of significant shift in terms of prioritisation and recognition of the importance of the Pacific to New Zealand. And we see this increasingly now as New Zealand undergoes both its national security development process with the National Security Strategy, the inaugural National Security Strategy to be launched in March 2023, which is a reflection of the commitments that New Zealand made under the Boy Declaration on Regional Security, which commits partners, signatories to developing national security strategies. And then along with that, we also have a defence review process, out of which will emerge a number of documents: the Defence Policy and Strategy Statement, the Defence Capability Plan, Future Force Design, and a Defence Review, which will be launched in 2024. So through this process, there is an opportunity to really reevaluate and consider the way in which New Zealand engages in the region particularly, and there are clear signals that New Zealand is pivoting to the Pacific even more so than it has so far. The fundamental challenge there is A, what are the drivers, and B, where are the resources and political. There may be political will, but the resources are not necessarily there. And this comes at a time when we face a general election next year, and as we all know, governments who have lasted through COVID don't normally withstand the next election, so we may not have a government led by Jacinda Ardern, who has been so fiercely committed to strengthening the relationships with the Pacific, and certainly not a foreign minister who has done so. So this is a key point for New Zealand, because part of that too is how New Zealand manages up its relationships with its partners, Australia particularly, which is always a challenging one, but also the United States, and many of the challenges that we've identified in the project around the uptick in tempo and engagement by partners, the challenges in terms of absorption capacity for Pacific Island countries, the frustrations that Pacific countries have in having to balance all of this interest suddenly when you're just trying to do your day-to-day job. All of these factors are things that dynamics which New Zealand also shares and is concerned about. And so as New Zealand looks to developing its thinking in the national security and defence and strategy space, an enormous part of that is going to be how New Zealand can contribute to security cooperation in the region and how New Zealand interprets that. And in contrast to James's point, whilst the patchwork nature of security cooperation and security architecture in the Pacific suits Australia, it also suits New Zealand, but for different reasons, because it allows a degree of ambiguity, it allows a degree of cherry picking. When you're a smaller country with a smaller budget, it allows for you to be able to develop relationships and engage in areas which are particularly niche. But the problem with that is that it creates a lack of consistency, a lack of coherency, and that in turn creates a degree of strategic ambiguity. And as New Zealand, and one of the things that we hear so often from our Pacific partners is the fact that there is growing concern that within this context of strategic competition, that the strategic choices that Pacific countries are being increasingly forced to make, that's the same choices that New Zealand is also needing to make as well. And so I will end my comments there and hand over to my colleague Alan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. My name is Alan Tidwell, and my vantage point, I suppose, on this project is really through the United States, and it's been fascinating to watch the United States turn its attention in perhaps a more deep and meaningful way towards the Pacific in recent years. And I just think back to an address that New Zealand Foreign Minister Winston Peters gave at Georgetown University shortly after the announcement of the Pacific Reset, in which Peters was urging the United States Congress and US policymakers to engage in the Pacific and really trying to underscore the relevance and importance of stability and security in the Pacific for US strategic interests. And that's been sort of the beginning place where I kind of came into this project, I suppose. But you know, the United States, it's always worth making the observation, and I know it's an obvious reminder, but it is a global power. And as a global power, its view on strategic cooperation is global. It's not regional. And so when you look at developing cooperation in a regional context, it requires some particular recalibrating of US infrastructure and US agencies to do that kind of cooperation within the region. You know, the United States has a large array of security cooperation agencies. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency is mandated by legislation, and it's given a remit on how it is to engage in security cooperation. But one of the things that's often required for that security cooperation is a military. And of course, with only 3 militaries in the Pacific, it constrains the United States Defense Security Cooperation Agency to a certain extent. And then it's interesting too to think about how the United States has tried to adapt its view on security cooperation to that which was voiced in the Boyd Declaration, with its particular emphasis on traditional and non-traditional security cooperation. The Defense Security Cooperation Agency understands the world of traditional security cooperation, but there is no definition in the United States government of what non-traditional security cooperation is. And so that there is no one agency, there's no one go-to point where in fact you can say, this is non-traditional security cooperation. And that taxes the US government system tremendously, in that you need to coordinate between agencies that are often at odds with one another. And the idea of trying to galvanize and bring together voices in Washington in order to engage in those security cooperation efforts is notable. I was saying to James Batley earlier when I got here this morning just how notable it is that you have an institution like ANU that brings together Pacific voices, and that you can in fact say, and excuse me James, I'm going to borrow some of our conversation, but you can say, oh, I want to get in touch with someone from Kiribati's foreign ministry. And at ANU, you can find that person, but they're here someplace. And I think someone is speaking today or tomorrow. In Washington, D.C., it's a much harder task to try to find those Pacific voices in Washington. Ken Cooper, from my friend from Guam, has got great depth of knowledge in the Pacific, but Ken is in Guam and often hard to access just by virtue of nothing else, just time. But so, I mean, we face some really interesting challenges in that space. The other observation I would make is that, of course, you're going to hear much more from Washington, D.C. about trying to balance engagement with the Pacific because of China and engaging with the Pacific for the Pacific. And that's going to be a really interesting process to watch unfold. Amata Radewagen, the representative from American Samoa, at the last PICL meeting, presented a paper in which she talked extensively about the Chinese challenge in the Pacific. And it's interesting to think a little bit about what Representative Radewagen was doing. She was trying to give voice to a point of view that would allow members of her more conservative right-wing GOP constituency to vote for the Pacific. And they needed a rationale that made sense to them. But Amata, of course, is herself a Pacific Islander and interested deeply in Pacific Island issues. But it was a really interesting strategic move on her part. So you're going to hear in the next year with this new Congress a lot more talk about China as a way of triggering funding for Pacific Island projects. The last comment I would make is just it's been a fascinating observation to look at the United States government, which traditionally deals with large institutions, with large nation states, grapple with smaller nation states in the Pacific and the way in which they try to engage. I think there's a very meaningful and considered view in the National Security Council to engage with the Pacific for the Pacific. I think that is constantly echoed by Kurt Campbell and others in the National Security Council. But still, there's a bit of a challenge in dealing with small government institutions from the small island states. So I think I'll just leave it there and pass it on to my friend.
Thank you very much. I came from Japan, and perhaps Japan has been kind of minor actors in the Pacific, although Japan has been quite active actors providing official government assistance to those Pacific Island countries. So, but my argument here in this my paper is that Japan is coming back to sort of as the to this area as a kind of political mid-security actors, and I think in Japan, I mean everybody, I mean including mine, knowledge that we forgot about Japan governed the micronations and the Marshall Islands and Northern Mariana Islands. We totally forgot kind of histories, and then after World War II, we lost the war, and the U.S. Perhaps dominant players, and Australia also the active player in this region. And but Japan recently, especially after Abe Shinzo came in office 2012, Japan has been more promoting sort of strategic activities involving hopefully Pacific Islands countries. And in particular, Japan has been hosting the conference, what they call the Pacific Islands Leaders Meeting, PALM, since 1997. And at the turning point came the 2018 that now Japan talks about the North Korean missile launching, and you just mentioned the Chinese advancing to the Pacific Islands, and then even we hosting the sort of defense or cooperation meeting that was 2021, last year, and that was quite a surprising move for me to to know what's really going on in the Japanese government. So my understanding of Japanese the approach to Pacific Island is more toward the sort of strategic, the idea rather than sort of comprehensive sense of security. We used to have, and we could just argue that the difficulty to watch to figure it out, what the no security cooperation and the traditional security, it's kind of total concept. We did actually late 1970s, and we did a lot of ODA to Southeast Asian countries, and also a lot of countries in the world, and African countries, of course, Pacific Islands countries. But now kind of we are more towards sort of traditional security, the strategy. And then so this is quite interesting, but at the same time, kind of makes us wonder why Japan does this. And even the general news media talks about Pacific Islands, like Solomon Islands, what's going on, and wow. And then I think the key point is, as you mentioned, China. And you can see this lines here, I just brought from Japan. I wrote the red marking the lines. And the left is the first island chain, and the next one is the second island chain, and the third island chain the right. And this is not my invention, okay? Please, this is the invention of the Chinese. I think his name is let's see, what's his name? Liu Hansen, the 1980s. So it's quite a big old concept. And then it's somehow kind of interesting and popular concept for not only by Japanese but also I think Americans or people can notice that. I think we tend to, what is this? And then this alliance has a huge implication that most of PIC that included between the second and third island chains. And then this year, I mean, China has been quite active in the PIC. Because PIC's location is very close to Hawaii, where Indo-Pacific Command locates. And if something happened United States, it's bad news for Japan because United States is a very important ally for Japan. And also this involved Australia. Also Australia is ally of United States. And now Japan has been quite actively cooperating with Australia for the last maybe 20, 30 years in the security area. So if something happened, kind of more favoring China in this area, it's bad news for Australia and United States and Japan. So Japan can be no longer minor actor, but another bad news is that Japan moves so slow, so slow, as well as the United States. And we still don't really think of this seriously, this importance of this area in terms of strategic sense. So I think the Japanese government is trying to figure out what should be done, but still we have Article 9 Constitution that's famous that we cannot really have a sort of highly merit-oriented cooperation and with foreign countries. We try to do, and then even we cannot make explicit strategic outlines, fighting against China. That's quite dangerous term, but so we have to have it, but we cannot really move toward that goal yet. So I think Japan knows what to do, but that doesn't mean they can do it at this point so quickly. So I think there are a lot of dilemma. So I'd like to really discuss the kind of dilemma with all of you, what kind of things we can be done. Of course, that requires the Pacific Islands corporations, how they understand Japan's positions, and how do we understand Pacific Island countries, the security positions. And perhaps China has been quite very attractive partner for them because they provide a lot of assistance for their facility buildings and the capacity building as well. So it's not bad news, maybe not bad news for Pacific Island countries. So there's a kind of a dilemma, a situation I'd like to really discuss with all of you, including here. Forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, hopefully that gives you all a sense about how we came here and what we've been thinking. But as I said in my comments, we've only got questions, we've still got a lot of questions to answer, and that's why the rest of the workshop, you won't be hearing from us, you'll be hearing from our fantastic speakers. And we'll start again after morning tea, thinking about what the COVID-19 response tells us about security cooperation in the Pacific Islands. So we'll break now until 10:30, and as I said, morning tea is just in the Coombs Extension, which is the building just across the